Hey there! I can't believe I'm finally telling you this story. It's been quite a journey, and I'm so glad I can share it with you now. So, picture this. I'm Andy, a 32-year-old nurse, and I've been married to Tom for 7 years. He's an accountant, and we live in this cute little house in a quiet neighborhood. Life seemed pretty perfect, you know. I remember thinking how lucky I was. Tom and I had our routines: morning coffee together, weekend brunches, movie nights. We even volunteered at the local animal shelter every month. I loved how we'd spend hours playing with the dogs and cats, laughing at their antics. It made me feel like we were this amazing team, you know? At work, I'd always brag about Tom to my colleagues. "Oh, Tom surprised me with flowers yesterday," or "Tom's planning a special dinner for our anniversary." I was that annoying friend always gushing about her husband, but I couldn't help it. I really thought I had it all. Our house was our little haven. We'd spent months decorating it together, arguing over paint colors and furniture placement, but in the end, it was perfect. Every corner held a memory, like the wonky shelf Tom installed that we joke about, or the plant I nearly killed that he miraculously saved. I remember this one time. I had a really rough day at the hospital. A patient I'd been caring for didn't make it, and I was devastated. Tom came home, took one look at me, and without a word, just held me. He ordered my favorite takeout, put on my favorite movie, and let me cry it out. That's the kind of guy I thought he was. Always there, always supportive. We had our plans, our dreams. We talked about having kids, maybe moving to a bigger house with a yard. We even started a savings account for a future family vacation. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Our families loved us together. My mom would always say, "Andy, you hit the jackpot with Tom." His parents treated me like their own daughter. Holidays were always a big, happy affair with both our families together. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what happily ever after looks like. I felt so secure, so loved. Tom was my rock, my partner, my best friend. I trusted him completely. Looking back now, I can't believe how blind I was. But that's the thing about trust, isn't it? When you love someone, you see what you want to see. You believe in the good because that's what you expect from someone who's supposed to love you back. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At this point in our story, life was good. I was happy, content, and so in love with my husband. I had no idea what was coming. No clue that my perfect little world was about to be turned upside down. If only I'd known then what I know now. But hey, that's life, right? You never see the storm coming until you're right in the middle of it. And let me tell you, this storm was a doozy. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let's just say, things were about to get very interesting in the life of Andy and Tom. So, remember how I said everything was perfect? Well, that's when things started to get a little weird. I didn't want to see it at first, but looking back, the signs were there. It all started with Tom's phone. You know how we used to leave our phones lying around? No big deal. Well, suddenly, Tom's phone became his new best friend. He'd carry it everywhere, even to the bathroom. And get this? He always kept it face down. I mean, who does that? I remember this one time, we were having dinner and his phone buzzed. He practically dove across the table to grab it. I was like, "Whoa, hot potato or what?" He just mumbled something about work and excused himself. When he came back, he looked, I don't know, flustered. And then there were the late nights at work. Tom had always been punctual, home by 6 p.m. sharp. But suddenly it was 7 p.m., then 8 p.m., sometimes even later. When I'd ask, he'd say, "Oh, big project, you know how it is." But something in his tone just felt off. One night, I decided to surprise him with his favorite takeout at his office. Guess what? He wasn't there. When he came home later, I casually mentioned I'd stopped by. You should have seen his face. He stuttered something about a client meeting, but he couldn't look me in the eye. Then there was this weird thing with his clothes. Tom used to be a jeans and t-shirt kind of guy on weekends. Suddenly, he's ironing shirts on Saturdays. And was that cologne? Since when did Tom wear cologne to run errands? I tried to shake it off, I kept telling myself, Andy, you're being paranoid. Tom loves you. He'd never... But there was this little voice in the back of my head that just wouldn't shut up. I remember this one Sunday morning. We were having breakfast, and Tom's phone kept buzzing. He kept checking it, smiling at the screen. When I asked who it was, he said, "Oh, just work stuff. On a Sunday? Really?" And get this, he started going to the gym. Tom, who used to say the only exercise he needed was walking to the fridge, suddenly became a fitness freak. He'd come home all sweaty, rush to the shower. Once, I tried to join him for a workout, and he got all weird about it, saying it was his thing. I started noticing changes in his routine too. He used to love our Friday night movie marathons. Suddenly, he was too tired or had work to catch up on. We stopped doing little things together like grocery shopping or walking the neighbor's dog. One day, I was doing laundry and found a receipt in his pocket. It was for a fancy restaurant we'd never been to. When I asked about it, he got all defensive, saying it was a business lunch. But since when did Tom have business lunches at places that serve champagne? I felt like I was going crazy. One minute, I'd convince myself everything was fine. The next, I'd be analyzing every little thing he did. Was that a new shirt? Why did he password protect his laptop? Why was he always texting? But every time I brought it up, Tom had an explanation. He was so convincing, so sincere. He'd look at me with those big brown eyes and say, "Andy, honey, you're the only one for me. You know that, right?" And I'd feel guilty for even doubting him. I tried to push these thoughts away. I threw myself into work, took on extra shifts. I told myself I was just stressed, imagining things. After all, this was Tom. My Tom. The guy who held me when I cried, who surprised me with flowers just because. He wouldn't. He couldn't. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, it kept growing. I didn't want to be that wife, the paranoid, suspicious one. But something wasn't right. I just couldn't put my finger on what. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. Things were about to get a whole lot more complicated, but at that point I was still in denial, still clinging to the idea of my perfect marriage. Oh, how naive I was. Okay, so remember those little doubts I was having? Well, they started to grow, like a lot. It was like I couldn't ignore them anymore, no matter how hard I tried. Tom's behavior was getting weirder by the day. I mean, we used to talk about everything, But suddenly, it was like living with a stranger. He'd come home late, barely say hello, and go straight to the shower. And when I'd try to talk to him, he'd give me these one-word answers. It was like pulling teeth. I remember this one night. I cooked his favorite meal, lasagna, garlic bread, the works. I even got that fancy wine he likes. I thought, this'll be great. We'll reconnect, talk things out. Ha! Guess what? He called last minute, said he had to work late. Again. I ended up eating alone, staring at his empty chair and the phone thing. It got worse. He'd jump every time it buzzed. Once, I reached for it to hand it to him, and he practically snatched it out of my hand. I was like, "Whoa! Easy there, tiger." He mumbled some excuse about client confidentiality. Since when were accountants so secretive? Then there was this work party. We used to love going to these things together. This time, he told me not to bother coming, said it would be boring for me. But when he came home that night, he smelled like perfume. Not my perfume, mind you. When I mentioned it, he got all defensive, saying I was imagining things. I started noticing other changes too. He'd go out for drinks with the guys more often, but when I'd casually ask which guys, he'd get all vague. Oh, just some work buddies. But Tom never had work buddies before. One day, I was cleaning and found a matchbook from a hotel in his jacket pocket, a hotel in our own town. When I asked about it, he said a client gave it to him. But why would a client give him matches from a local hotel? I couldn't shake this feeling in my gut. You know that feeling when you know something's wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it? Yeah, that. It was driving me crazy. I started losing sleep. I'd lie awake at night, listening to Tom's steady breathing, wondering what was going on in his head. Was he dreaming of someone else? Was our whole marriage a lie? Work became my escape. I'd take extra shifts, anything to keep my mind off what was happening at home. My colleagues started noticing. "Andy, are you okay?" they'd ask. I'd paste on a smile and say everything was fine, but inside, I was falling apart. I tried talking to Tom about it. I really did. One night, I sat him down and said, "Tom, I feel like we're drifting apart. What's going on?" You know what he did? He laughed it off, said I was being silly, that everything was fine. But his eyes, they didn't match his smile. I started questioning everything. Was I being paranoid? Was I the problem? Maybe I was working too much. Maybe I wasn't attentive enough. I even started dressing up more, thinking maybe he'd lost interest in me. But nothing changed. If anything, Tom became more distant. He stopped asking about my day. Our goodnight kisses became quick pecks. Sex? Forget about it. He was always too tired or had a headache. I knew something had to give. I couldn't keep living like this, in this limbo of doubt and fear. I needed answers. I needed the truth. Little did I know, the truth would be more painful than I could have ever imagined. All right, so there I was, feeling like I was going crazy with all these suspicions. I knew I had to do something, you know. I couldn't just sit around wondering anymore. So I decided to put on my detective hat and do some digging. First things first, I thought I'd start with our shared computer. Tom always left it logged in, so one day when he was at work, I sat down and took a deep breath. "Okay, Andy," I told myself, "let's see what we've got here." I opened up the browser history, and boy, was that an eye-opener. There were searches for fancy restaurants I'd never heard of, jewelry stores, and even some high-end lingerie sites. Now, I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but last time I checked, Tom wasn't buying me any fancy underwear. Then I noticed something else. He'd been looking up hotels, not for a vacation or anything, but local ones. Who looks up hotels in their own town? My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I dug a little deeper and found his email was still logged in. I know, invasion of privacy and all that. But at this point, I was beyond caring. I scrolled through and there it was, receipts for dinners and gifts I knew nothing about. Who was he whining and dining? Just then, I heard a car pull up outside. Panic mode activated. I quickly closed everything down, trying to leave it exactly as I found it. I barely made it to the kitchen before Tom walked in. He gave me a quick peck on the cheek and headed straight for the shower. Typical. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with all these new questions. Who was he buying gifts for? Why was he looking up hotels? I felt sick to my stomach. The next day, I decided to take things up a notch. While Tom was in the shower, I grabbed his phone. It was locked, of course. I tried his birthday, nope. Our anniversary, nada. Then, on a hunch, I tried 1234. Bingo. Note to self. Tell Tom to upgrade his security if we make it through this. I started scrolling through his messages. Most were normal work stuff, but then I saw a conversation with someone named A, just A. No full name, no picture. The messages were vague, lots of, "can't wait to see you," and "miss you already." My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. I heard the shower turn off and quickly put the phone back. Tom came out, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was about to come crashing down. Over the next few days, I became a regular Sherlock Holmes. I checked credit card statements, finding charges for restaurants and stores I'd never been to. I even found a receipt for a necklace in his jacket pocket, definitely not one I owned. One day, I accidentally knocked over his briefcase. Out fell a small notebook. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. As I gathered more and more evidence, I felt this mix of vindication and devastation. Part of me wanted to be wrong so badly, but another part, that part was angry. Angry at Tom for lying, angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. I knew I was getting close to the truth, but was I ready for it? Could I handle what I might find? I didn't know, but I knew I had to keep going. For my own sanity, for my own self-respect. Whatever was going on, I was going to get to the bottom of it. Little did I know, the biggest revelation was yet to come, and it would change everything. So there I was, playing detective in my own marriage. Talk about surreal, right? I had all these little clues, but nothing concrete. It was driving me absolutely bonkers. One day, I thought I had a breakthrough. I found a receipt for a fancy Italian restaurant in Tom's pants pocket while doing laundry. My heart was racing as I Googled the place. It was one of those romantic, candlelit spots. Definitely not somewhere you'd take a client. I decided to stake it out. I know, totally crazy, but I had to see for myself. So I took a half day off work and parked across the street from the restaurant. I felt like a character in one of those cheesy spy movies, complete with oversized sunglasses and a baseball cap. Hours went by. Nothing. Just as I was about to give up, I saw Tom's car pull up. My heart was in my throat. This was it, I thought. But then, he walked in alone. A few minutes later, I saw him at a table, having dinner with an older man in a suit. Turned out it really was a client meeting. I felt so stupid. Another time, I got suspicious about his sudden interest in going to the gym. I mean, Tom used to say the only running he did was running late for work. So one day, I decided to surprise him there. I got all dolled up in my workout gear and headed over. Guess what? There he was, sweating buckets on the treadmill. When he saw me, he looked genuinely surprised. "Andy, what are you doing here?" he asked, panting. We ended up having a nice workout together. For a moment, it felt like old times. Then there was the mysterious phone call incident. I overheard Tom talking in hushed tones in our backyard. My imagination went wild. Was he talking to her? I snuck closer to listen. Turns out he was planning a surprise party for his mom's birthday. I felt like such a heel. One night, Tom came home late, smelling of perfume again. I was ready to confront him. Sure, this was the smoking gun. But before I could say anything, he excitedly told me about how he'd helped a coworker pick out a perfume for his wife's birthday. He even brought home a sample for me to try. It seemed like every time I thought I had evidence, it turned out to be nothing. Was I going crazy? Was I seeing problems where there weren't any? I started doubting myself. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe all those little things I'd noticed were just coincidences. After all, Tom was still the same guy who'd bring me soup when I was sick and laugh at my terrible jokes. I remember sitting on our bed one night, looking at all the evidence I'd collected, receipts, notes, times, and dates. It all seemed so silly now. Was I really turning into one of those obsessive, paranoid wives? I decided to take a step back. Maybe I was creating problems in my head. I mean, every relationship goes through rough patches, right? Maybe this was just ours. So I tried to push all those suspicions away. I focused on being a better wife, on reconnecting with Tom. I planned date nights, cooked his favorite meals, tried to be more understanding about his late nights at work. For a while, things seemed to get better. We were laughing more, talking more. I started to feel like maybe, just maybe, I'd been wrong about everything. But then, well, let's just say the universe had other plans. Just when I thought everything was back to normal, something happened that changed everything. But that's a story for another time. Looking back now, I realize those false alarms were just the calm before the storm. If only I'd known what was coming next. Okay, so remember how I thought I was done playing detective? Well, turns out I was just getting started. I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that something was still off, you know? So, I decided to up my game. I mean, if Tom was hiding something, he was doing a darn good job of it. I needed to be smarter, more tech-savvy. That's when I had this crazy idea. I'd install a tracking app on his phone. I know. It sounds totally insane and probably illegal, but I was desperate. Okay. So, one night when Tom was in the shower, I grabbed his phone and downloaded this app. It was supposed to be invisible, so he wouldn't know it was there. The next few days were like a roller coaster. Every time Tom's phone moved, I got a notification. At first, it was boring stuff, home, office, gym. But then, one evening, the app showed him at an address I didn't recognize. My heart was pounding as I Googled the location. It was a bar downtown, one of those fancy cocktail places. Tom hated cocktails, or so I thought. I sat there, staring at my phone, watching the little dot that was my husband stay at that bar for hours. When he came home that night, he said he'd been working late. I wanted to scream, to confront him right there, but I held back. I needed more proof. Over the next week, I became obsessed with that app. I'd check it constantly, making mental notes of every place he went. Most of the time, it matched what he told me. But there were these odd discrepancies, times when he said he was at work, but the app showed him somewhere else. One day, I decided to follow the app in real time. Tom said he had a late meeting, but the app showed him heading towards that same bar downtown. I jumped in my car and raced over there, my mind spinning with possibilities. I parked across the street, my hands shaking as I watched the entrance. And then I saw him, Tom, my husband, walking into the bar. But he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him, laughing at something he said. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to storm in there, to confront them both. But something held me back. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was shock. I sat in my car for hours, watching that door. When they finally came out, Tom gave her a hug, a little too long for my liking, and they went their separate ways. That night, when Tom came home, he acted like everything was normal. He kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to demand answers, but I held it all in. I needed to be smart about this. The next few days were a blur. I started digging deeper, looking for any connection between Tom and this mystery woman. I went through his emails again, his social media, anything I could think of, and then I found it. A name, Amanda. It was buried in an old email thread. My hands were shaking as I Googled her name along with Tom's company. There she was, a new client they'd taken on a few months ago. Was this all just business? Was I jumping to conclusions again? But why the secrecy? Why the lies about working late? I knew I was at a crossroads. I could confront Tom with what I knew. But what if I was wrong? What if there was an innocent explanation for all of this? Or I could dig deeper, gather more evidence. But did I really want to know the truth? Was I ready for what I might find? As I sat there, staring at Amanda's picture on my computer screen, I realized something. This wasn't just about Tom anymore. This was about me, about what I was willing to accept, what I deserved. I took a deep breath and made a decision. No more hiding, no more guessing. It was time to face this head on, whatever this was. Little did I know. My world was about to be turned upside down in ways I never could have imagined. So, there I was, armed with my tracking app and a whole lot of suspicion. I felt like I was on the verge of uncovering something big, you know? And boy, was I right. I started following Tom more closely, not just through the app, but in real life too. I'd accidentally bump into him during his lunch breaks or show up at his office unannounced. Each time, he seemed more and more flustered. One day, I decided to go all out. I told Tom I was visiting my sister for the weekend. Instead, I booked a room at the hotel across from his office. Crazy, right? But I was desperate for answers. Friday night, I saw him leave work late. No surprise there. But instead of heading home, he drove to that fancy bar again. I followed at a safe distance, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. And there she was again, Amanda. They sat at a corner table, heads close together, laughing and talking. I watched as Tom reached across the table and took her hand. That's when I felt it, a pain in my chest so sharp I could barely breathe. I wanted to storm in there to make a scene, but something held me back. Instead, I took out my phone and started recording. Evidence, I told myself. I needed evidence. They stayed at the bar for hours. When they finally left, I followed them. They went to a nearby park, still holding hands, still laughing. I kept recording even though each second felt like a knife twisting in my heart. That's when it happened. They stopped under a streetlight, and Tom pulled Amanda close. And then they kissed. Not a friendly peck, but a full-on, passionate kiss. I nearly dropped my phone. I don't know how I made it back to the hotel. I just remember sitting on the bed, watching the video over and over again, tears streaming down my face. It was real. It was all real. The next day, I didn't confront Tom. I couldn't. Instead, I dug deeper. I hacked into his email. Turns out, using your dog's name as a password isn't very secure, Tom. What I found made me sick. Emails going back months. Plans for secret meetups. Sweet nothings that used to be reserved for me. And worst of all, plans for a future. Their future. I printed it all out. The emails, the pictures from the tracking app, screenshots of text messages. I even got a copy of hotel receipts. Yeah, they'd been meeting at hotels too. As I sat there, staring at this mountain of evidence, I felt numb. All those times he said he was working late, all those business trips, all those client meetings, lies, all of it. I thought about all the nights I'd spent worrying, all the times I doubted myself, thinking I was crazy or paranoid. Turns out, my gut was right all along. That night, when Tom came home, he acted like everything was normal. He kissed me on the cheek, asked about my trip to my sister's. I played along, plastering a fake smile on my face, but inside, I was screaming. I knew I had to confront him. I couldn't live like this anymore, but I was scared. Scared of the truth, scared of what would happen next. Our whole life together, everything we'd built. It was all based on lies. As I lay in bed that night, Tom sleeping soundly beside me, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I'd confront him. Tomorrow, everything would change. Little did I know, everything was an understatement. The confrontation that was coming, well, let's just say it would make everything that came before look like a walk in the park. Okay, so this is it, the big showdown. I woke up that morning feeling like I was going into battle. My hands were shaking as I got the kids off to school and waited for Tom to come downstairs. When he finally appeared, all smiles and "Good morning, honey," I thought I might throw up. But I steeled myself. This was it. "Tom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to talk." He looked at me, confusion crossing his face. "Sure, what's up?" I took a deep breath and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. "I know about Amanda," I said, watching his face carefully. For a second, he looked blank. Then, I saw it, that flash of panic in his eyes. But he quickly covered it up. "Amanda, my client, what about her?" He tried to sound casual, but I could hear the tension in his voice. "Don't lie to me, Tom. Not anymore." I opened the folder and started laying out the evidence. The hotel receipts, the screenshots of texts, the pictures from the tracking app. His face went pale. "Andy, I can explain." "Explain what?" I cut him off. "Explain how you've been lying to me for months, how you've been sneaking around behind my back." He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. "It's not what you think," he said. "Really? Because I think you've been having an affair. I think you've been lying to me, to our kids, to everyone." That's when he got defensive. "You went through my things. You tracked me. How could you invade my privacy like that?" I couldn't believe it. He was trying to turn this around on me. How could I? How could you, Tom? How could you betray our marriage, our family? We went back and forth, voices rising. He denied, then deflected, then tried to minimize what he'd done. But I wasn't having it. I'd spent too many nights crying, Too many days doubting myself. I want the truth, Tom, all of it now. And finally, he broke. The whole story came pouring out. How he'd met Amanda at a conference. How one thing led to another. How he'd felt trapped in our marriage. How Amanda made him feel alive again. Each word was like a knife to my heart. But I listened, tears streaming down my face. When he finished, there was silence. I looked at this man, this stranger who'd shared my bed for years, and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. I want a divorce, I said quietly. His head snapped up. Andy, no, we can work this out. I'll end it with Amanda, I promise. I'll do anything. But I was done. Done with the lies. Done with the pain. It's over, Tom. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it. I stood up, my legs shaky but my resolve firm. I want you out of the house. Today. He tried to argue, to plead, but I was beyond listening. I walked out of the room, out of our marriage, out of the life I thought we had. As I heard him moving around upstairs, packing his things, I sat in the kitchen, staring at my wedding ring. I slipped it off, feeling its weight in my hand. Then I placed it on the table, next to the divorce papers I'd already prepared. When Tom came downstairs, suitcase in hand, he saw the ring and the papers. He looked at me, a broken man, but I felt no pity. Goodbye, Tom, I said. As the door closed behind him, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, peace. It was over. The lies, the doubts, the pain, it was all over. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a whole new chapter in my life. A chapter that would test me in ways I never imagined, but also show me just how strong I really was. After Tom left, I felt like I was living in a fog. Everything seemed unreal, you know? Like I was watching someone else's life fall apart, not mine. The first few days were the hardest. I'd wake up expecting to see Tom next to me, only to remember he was gone. The house felt so empty, so quiet. Even the kids noticed something was off, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them yet. I tried to keep busy, to act normal for the kids' sake, but inside, I was a mess. I'd find myself staring into space, replaying every moment of our marriage, wondering where it all went wrong. Was it something I did, something I didn't do? One night, after the kids were in bed, I broke down completely. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by old photo albums, sobbing my heart out. All those happy memories, all those plans we'd made, they felt like a cruel joke now. I started doubting everything. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe we could have worked it out. I even picked up the phone to call Tom a few times, but I always hung up before dialing. I knew deep down that it was over, but my heart hadn't caught up with my head yet. Work became a blur. I'd go through the motions, but I couldn't focus. My colleagues were worried. I could tell. But how could I explain that my entire life had been a lie? The worst part was the loneliness. Even when I was with friends or family, I felt alone. No one really understood what I was going through. They'd offer well-meaning advice or tell me I was better off without Tom, but it didn't help. I felt like I was drowning, and no one could reach me. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake for hours, my mind racing. When I did sleep, I had nightmares about Tom and Amanda. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, feeling sick to my stomach. Food lost all taste. I'd forget to eat, then binge on junk food late at night. I lost weight, then gained it back. My emotions were all over the place. One minute I'd be angry, the next I'd be crying uncontrollably. I questioned everything about myself. Was I not pretty enough? Not smart enough? What did Amanda have that I didn't? I'd stand in front of the mirror, picking apart every flaw, every imperfection. The kids started asking questions. When is Dad coming home? Why are you sad all the time, Mom? I tried to shield them from my pain, but kids are perceptive. They knew something was wrong. One day, I found myself sitting in my car in the parking lot of Tom's office. I don't even remember driving there. I just sat there watching people come and go, wondering if Amanda was in there, wondering if they were together right now, laughing, kissing, planning their future. That's when it hit me. I was letting this destroy me. I was letting Tom and his betrayal define me. And for what? A man who didn't value our marriage, our family. I drove home that day feeling different. Not better, not really, but different. Like I'd hit rock bottom and the only way left was up. I knew I had a long way to go. The pain, the doubt, the anger, it was all still there. But for the first time since Tom left, I felt a tiny spark of something else. Hope. Maybe, or determination. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I'd ever trust again, ever love again. But I knew one thing. I was done letting Tom's choices control my life. It was time to start picking up the pieces. Time to start rebuilding. Little did I know, the journey ahead would be harder and more rewarding than I ever could have imagined. So, there I was, at rock bottom. But you know what they say, the only way from there is up. And boy, did I climb. First things first, I decided to take control of my life again. No more moping around, no more feeling sorry for myself. I woke up one morning and said, Andy, it's time to get your act together. I started small. I set an alarm, got up early, and went for a run. It was tough at first. I was so out of shape, but each day got a little easier. Soon, I was running 5K without breaking a sweat. Next, I focused on the kids. I sat them down and explained what was happening with their dad. It was hard, but they deserved the truth. We cried together, hugged a lot, and promised to stick together no matter what. Then, I tackled the house. Out went all of Tom's stuff. I redecorated, painted the walls, bought new furniture. It was like washing away the old life and welcoming in the new. The kids and I made it a project, turning it into something fun rather than sad. Work was next on my list. I threw myself into it, taking on new projects, staying late to catch up on everything I'd let slide. My boss noticed. Within a few months, I got a promotion. Take that, Tom. I started reconnecting with old friends, ones I'd lost touch with during my marriage. We'd go out for coffee, catch up on life. It felt good to laugh again, to remember who I was before I became Tom's wife. One day, my friend Lisa convinced me to join her yoga class. I was terrible at first, falling over in every pose, but I stuck with it. Soon I was doing headstands and feeling more centered than I had in years. I also decided to see a therapist. It was tough opening up at first, but it helped so much. I learned to process my anger, my hurt, and most importantly, to forgive myself. I wasn't to blame for Tom's choices. As the months passed, I noticed changes. My smile came easier. I slept better. Food tasted good again. I even started dating a bit. Nothing serious, just coffee here and there. But it felt good to know I was still desirable, still capable of connecting with someone. The kids were doing better too. We had our rough patches, sure, but we got through them together. We started new traditions, Friday night pizza and movie nights, Sunday morning pancakes. Our little family unit grew stronger than ever. One day, about a year after Tom left, I ran into him at the grocery store. He looked different, older somehow, tired. He tried to make small talk, asked how I was doing. I realized something in that moment. I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no longing. Just nothing. As I walked away, leaving him standing there with his cart full of frozen dinners, I felt a surge of pride. I'd done it. I'd survived. More than that, I'd thrived. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't the same one from a year ago. This woman was stronger, wiser, happier. She had laugh lines around her eyes and a confident set to her shoulders. I smiled at my reflection. "You did it, Andy," I whispered. "You gave yourself a second chance at happiness." As for Tom, last I heard, he and Amanda didn't work out. He lost his job, his reputation in tatters after the affair came to light at work. But you know what? That's his story. I'm too busy writing my own to worry about his anymore. Life isn't perfect. I still have my bad days. But now I know I can handle them. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. And let me tell you, it feels pretty darn good.